you say, well, it's only smart for me to take my money and put it in a low tax jurisdiction, you are stealing from the Canadian people. And that's why, if you're a Canadian voter, you should care about tax and tax justice. My name is Fariya Mohiuddin, and I'm an international, almost, tax justice expert. A wealth tax stops people from, surprise, accumulating too much wealth. What people don't realize is it's not actually incomes that cause inequality, it's actually how people accumulate wealth, and that's what's causing the widening inequality that we see everywhere, not only in developing countries, but also in the developed world. A wealth tax will help combat the ability of people to hoard money. So the current proposals that we're seeing, not only in the American election cycle, but also the Canadian election cycle, are all very solid proposals. In terms, if they implemented to the fullest of their ability, I think can actually help combat inequality and fund social programs. However, the reality of implementing this wealth tax or these wealth taxes are really stark and very different. One thing is that in the Canadian case, so it's a 1% tax on wealth above $20 million. Lovely, right? The problem is if you have more than $20 million in wealth, it's not in Canada. People like that, ultra wealthy people, have the ability to buy themselves out of the tax system. How do they do this? They create shell corporations or they create trusts incorporated in tax havens or low tax jurisdictions. So for Canadians, often the tax haven of choice is the Cayman Islands or the Bahamas or the British Virgin Islands. So say I'm a person with $20 million and I want to hide it. How do I do that? I get my accountant, who will often work for the Big Four and or one of the large legal firms, to set up a company which I pay for services. Then later that same company in the Cayman Islands will pay me for quote-unquote services. And this then makes sure that that income and that money does not get taxed. So the first problem that the Canadian Revenue Agency will have is to figure out where that money is going. You know, if you have $20 million, where is that $20 million? Is it actually in Canada? The second issue is how do you then track it to specific people to be able to enforce that wealth tax? Now, to do that, what we would actually ideally need is for places like the Cayman Islands, BVI, Bahamas, to work with Canadian authorities to publish a public register of beneficial owners. What does that mean? That means if there's a trust in the Cayman Islands that, the Canadian authorities are there's a lot of transactions with Canadian entities or Canadian people. I would like to know who actually owns this thing, how much money is going into it. The Canadian Revenue Agency actually needs to make sure that the Bahamian government or the Cayman Island government or the authorities there are willing to give up that information. Now, and that information is publicly available and easily searchable, which at the current moment is not. That also applies to Canadian trusts, which are often also operating in a shroud of not exactly secrecy, but hard to find information. So the call to action on if you are serious about a wealth tax is to support public registers of beneficial ownership. And the key people in Canada that are working on this are Canadians for Tax Fairness. In the US, it's actually Oxfam USA. More globally, it's entities like Global Witness and Transparency International. So while the wealth tax is a great idea, if you don't know how that money is leaving Canada and where it's going, it's useless. And because your number one assumption should be that money is not in Canada, it's offshore. I love when people tell me taxation is theft. Here's what is actually theft. If you are a business owner and you're particularly a very successful one, right? You've got tons of wealth, you're yes, I'm really creating jobs. Okay, here's what the truth is, particularly if you're Canadian, right? If you went to school in Canada, especially if you went to university, that was subsidized by taxpayer money. If you go to work, highways, roads, transit, taxpayer money. So if you are a business owner and you have healthy, educated workers who come to work on time, You have laws that enforce your contracts. These are all things that happen because of tax, taxpayer money, government investment.